in that whole process. It was the first time he'd cried. It was the first time I could see that he was scared. I still remember it to this day, actually. He looked at me and he said, "Gill, I don't want to die. I don't want to die."
Life and death, today and tomorrow. We're not afraid to talk about the complexity around saying farewell. From the experts at Celebrating Life. Welcome, I'm Kate Morgan, co-founder and head of memorials at Tomorrow Funerals. Our guest is the beautiful Gill Malona, whose husband, Hans, passed away just before the birth of their first child. Today's conversation is about the difficult decision that Gill and her husband made about deciding to start a family, knowing that he wouldn't be around to be a part of it. Gill, hello. Thank you so much for being here today as one of our very first guests.
Thanks for having me.
I thought I'd just start by reading what was on Hans's memorial website. Just that little bit of background, just so that we have a little bit about him. We put there, we wrote this together. Hans was a gentleman. He was funny, clever, and always happy to do things for people or to care for them. This selflessness was simply a part of his nature and had been since he was young. Quirky and sometimes introverted, Hans had a way about him. His clever comments and unique sense of humour were and will always be remembered as being just so Hans. That's what you said. A major foodie, Hans loved visiting the markets, food stalls, and quite simply could never pass by a hot jam donut van. Hans is greatly missed by many, especially his loving wife Gill and both of their families, including their four-legged family, Dre, Bunny, Rocket and Louie. But of course you've added to the family in a human way because you've welcomed Olivia.
Yes.
Yeah. How old is Olivia? She's 2 now?
She's 15 months.
15 months. Okay. How's she going?
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
She's so cute.
She's
I've seen
thriving.
her on Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she's very good.
Yeah.
She looks so much like Hans.
Does she?
She looks absolutely nothing like me. So, yeah,
but she's got your personality, you said.
Yes. Unfortunately, I'm not sure.
Oh, dear. Okay. I was going to ask you, what do you love about Hans? When I say that, when I first wrote the question, I thought, what did you love about Hans? But then I realised that's probably the wrong way to ask it because it's what do you love about Hans?
Yes. Yes.
So what do you love about Hans?
He's someone I'll continue to love. We were together for 9 years already, so it's almost like I never even really actively thought about what I loved about him specifically because it was just a knowing that I did and I do. But if I were to describe it in words, I suppose the intro that you had of him was a really good summary. I was thinking about it on the drive here and I thought, oh my gosh, what if she asks? What am I going to say? How am I going to say it? But yeah, I just love that he was a person who was so selfless and dedicated to the people who he loved and cared about.
Yeah.
He was just a very unique person in his sense of humour and his mannerisms, and to this day it's not just me who remembers that, but it's his friends and my family and his family. So he was just someone that you would remember just because he was.
Yeah, and that certainly came about at the memorial service. That's what I got, that people had such beautiful things to say about him, like a really special person. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the time of the diagnosis and how that was for you and Hans?
I was actually trying to remember this last night. I guess it's been 2.5 years since that time, I think.
Since the diagnosis?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's 2021 in July.
Right.
So, and I actually went through our messages, which I haven't done in a long time, long time, because I wanted to remember the moment that we got the news.
Were you with Hans during the actual time that he was told that he had colon cancer?
Yes, and this is where I was going through our messages and, that's how I found out. So the doctor had rang me and kind of explained, look, after the scan, it looks like there's a mass of some sort. We don't know whether it's malignant or whether it's benign. But I already knew. I already knew. And Hans was kind of like, there's a mass. And they said, he sent me a picture of a consent form for a type of surgery, that was to happen the next day. He was transferred to a different hospital. By the time I was able to go in, he was already in the procedure. And when he came back, everyone, the way the nurses kind of interacted with him, and every time I'd asked, where's the doctor? I'd like to know what the outcome is of the surgery, because they actually didn't do the procedure. They just had a look inside. 3 doctors come in and they tell us that it's malignant, and that it had spread, and there was multiple growths in his abdomen. And I kind of asked, what stage? And the doctor said stage 4. And that's when I suppose I lost it a little bit, because colon cancer, stage 4, is never good news. Stage 4 of anything is never good news, but especially with the way it had spread as well. And Hans and I are in the room, and he asks me, what's stage 4? Then I kind of said, stage 1 is when it's quite localized, and stage 4 is the worst. It's the last stage. And he, for the first time in that whole process, it was the first time he'd cried. It was the first time I could see that he was scared. When he found out he had cancer, which was just minutes before that, he was kind of like, okay, all right, what are we going to do about it? And then he found out the extent of how bad it was, and that's when he got emotional, and he looked at me, and I still remember it to this day, actually. He looked at me and he said, Gill, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And before I knew better, I kind of held him and I said, no, it'll be fine. You're not going to die. I won't let that happen. So yeah, that's the moment of diagnosis.
Yeah.
And that night I begged the hospital to let me stay. It was a public hospital, so generally they don't have people stay, but I begged and begged and begged, and they let me. So I got to sleep on a mattress on the floor that night, and stay with him, just to be there.
Yeah. And then you went on to do some incredible things. You planned a wedding. You then decided to have a child together. What an amazing, what was the time frame that you had before Hans died?
14 months.
14 months, yeah. What precious time.
Yeah.
If you go back a couple of years, maybe 3 or 4 years, what were your future plans together? What were your plans for life?
I was basically waiting for him to propose. I mean, we already had a house together.
Yep.
We'd both progressed in our careers nicely. We kind of had everything. Traditionally, we had everything that we went the straight line of finishing high school and uni, work, and finding each other and the house and the pets. So I was waiting for him to propose, and he did. So prior to the diagnosis, actually, we were already engaged. So yeah, I suppose our future plans were to get married, and he wanted kids, and I wasn't particularly fussed, I suppose. I always thought, with the right person, sure.
Yeah.
I'll have children, but if my partner didn't want any, then I'd be fine with that too.
And did you come round to that idea? Because, of course, the next thing I wanted to ask you about is making the decision to start a family, because that was post the diagnosis. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that, about how you changed your mind from not being sure about having kids to knowing you wanted them?
Yes. Big question.
Yeah, it is a big question.
So when he was diagnosed, we were meant to get married February the following year, but we moved it forward to November.
Oh, yep.
So July it's around this time actually. July 2021, I believe, he was diagnosed. We moved the wedding forward because we just were uncertain about, how things will go. And that was one thing that, I didn't hesitate to do.
To bring the wedding forward?
Yeah. If it was something that he could experience, a nice wedding, getting married to who he says is the love of his life.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that we had that. And then January 2022 was when we were told that it was terminal.
Yep.
So it was very quick. And I thought, okay, your life, the timeline that they gave us was 10 to 12 months from that time. And I thought, okay, that's enough time to try and get pregnant and, be pregnant and give birth.
Yeah, right.
And that would be enough time for him to hopefully live long enough to meet his child. So ultimately, that was my, I suppose, reasoning.
Yep.
Is that he has always wanted to have kids. He was able to get married, and I thought, okay, why not? Why not? Let's, why not give him this thing? But of course, that came with a lot of other planning. It wasn't just, okay, I'll have a baby because, so you can meet this baby.
How did Hans feel about the idea of having a child? Was it his choice as well as yours?
It was. As soon as he got diagnosed, I thought, let's just do it. Let's just try for a baby. Let's just do it. Nothing will change. Even if it goes downhill, I will still have a baby. It'll be your baby and it'll be our child. But he kind of said, no, we'll just see how it goes. I think it hopefully it'll be okay, and we can try in less stressful times. And I thought, okay. But then that's when the terminal diagnosis came through, and we thought, okay, we're on a time crunch here. And he then felt that it was a silly decision to do it. Because he was concerned about my future.
Yep.
He wasn't even worried about, his health and the fact that he was dying. He was worried about the aftermath of that. And he said specifically, I don't want you to be a single mum. I don't want you to go through a pregnancy on your own. I don't want you to raise a child on your own. It's not going to be easy. And why would I agree to that and put you through that? And that's the next layer of my reasoning, is that I was so deep in anticipatory grief, I suppose, that I was just trying to grab everything and make sure that I had a physical representation of him. Because I knew that once he died, his body would be buried or cremated or whatever he chose. And, that'll be it. I wouldn't have him.
And so do you mean that that child was a part of that? You're having your child?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I thought, if I could preserve a piece of you that is living, I will do it. And I will, at the time I didn't know, of course, I wasn't a mum yet. I didn't know what it was like to be a mum. I didn't know what it was like to be a parent, let alone doing it on my own. But I said, if I can survive you dying, I can do anything. What could be worse than losing you? And that's essentially when he agreed, is that he figured I wasn't going to change my mind.
Tell me about the process of getting pregnant at that time. What happened?
So prior to him starting chemo, because that affects, obviously, that is poison for bad cells and good cells, basically. So we made sure that we did sperm banking prior to, right after his diagnosis, and that's when we did it. So essentially, when he was diagnosed as terminal, he was receiving chemotherapy quite consistently prior to a surgery that had failed. And then after the terminal diagnosis, he was then to receive palliative chemotherapy. So there was no kind of space for his body to recover and for us to try naturally. Hence why we went through the IVF route to try and get pregnant. So that took quite some time. I didn't think it would be so... I didn't think that it would drag on so much because our case was unique and perhaps controversial ethically.
Right, really?
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
according to...
according to the, I suppose, IVF clinic that we were going through.
So it wasn't as simple as just saying this is what we want. They put you through a process. Right.
Yeah. And I suppose it's fair enough, given that they knew the amount of stress that my body was about to go through in terms of losing my husband and grief, and is it really safe for us to get someone pregnant knowing that these things would eventually happen. So, yeah, it took quite some time to get the process started, but by month 4 or 5, I believe, we went through a process and, received the news that we were pregnant after a few attempts.
That's good. That's great, yeah. And how did you feel at that point? How did you both feel?
To be completely honest, I don't remember.
Yeah.
At the time, we were going through palliative chemotherapy. I was going through IVF treatment, all the medications that you have to give yourself. We were preparing for a surgery in Sydney that we were going to reattempt. So all of that time was just go, go, go. We were also engaging with an integrative doctor to try natural things, to help with the side effects of chemotherapy. So it was a juggle. And when I found out I was pregnant, it wasn't as, I wouldn't say it wasn't as special, but it wasn't like what you see people do, where they surprise their partner with a positive pregnancy test. For us, it was like, it was a third go. It was like, okay, what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
So it was a relief, I suppose. It was a relief that it had finally worked because we knew that our time was getting shorter and shorter. I mean, it was January. He was told he had 10 to 12 months to live. And then by July, we were still trying.
Are there things that you wish you'd known then that you know now? Or do you just see it as, what more could you have done?
A lot, I suppose. But I've come to accept that we can't have two goes at the decisions that we make when it comes to these things. For a while there, I really, really tried to, think what else could I have done differently? What if we did this? Would he have suffered less? What if we didn't go through the second surgery? How long would he have survived on palliative chemotherapy, which he was doing quite well on? So a lot of those questions come up, given that I really took charge in terms of the medical side of things. I was doing my own research and I was consulting with specialists, all those things. So there's definitely a lot of things that I wish we could change, but then again, we could change it and come back to now and it would be the same because we wouldn't have been able to try the other side. And what you have is what you have, and
it's finite.
Exactly.
So Gill, I know that you call yourself a widow. That's the term that you use. Is that right?
Yes, if I have to define my relationship status.
Oh, as a relationship status. And it's quite, in my mind, almost like an old-fashioned, in my mind, it's like an old-fashioned kind of term. How do you feel about that word and, what does it mean to you?
I don't feel a particular strong emotion towards it. I think to me it just is.
Yeah.
And it means that I'd lost someone that I'd loved, and that person was my partner or my husband. And that's, I don't feel a particularly strong emotion towards
that's fine.
label.
In that time, have you found other people or other women or men in that same situation as you, being a young parent and a widow or a widower?
Before Hans passed away, I was already looking for communities that would understand. So there are a few Facebook groups and, a lot of social media personalities as well that shared their journey. So in that regard, yes. But people who are here and now and I can, communicate with in person, not many.
Not many, yeah.
Not many.
So you were looking for that kind of community?
I was, yeah.
And what did you get out of that sort of shared
experience?
Yeah.
I suppose it's what's after this, what's after, how did you live? How did you survive it? Well, you're still here. How did you do it? Tell me, because I'm about to go through it. So it's just, I suppose I didn't think about it then, but I suppose it gave me some hope that I would come out of it somehow. And a lot of the things that I spoke to them about was, if you could go back in time where your partner was still alive, what are the things that you would do? Those are the questions that I'd
Did you ask
ask
those
them.
questions?
I did.
And what did they say?
The same. It's the little things. Record videos, take pictures, save their handwriting if you can. Ask them what their favourite song is. What's his favourite movie? Those are the things that you just go through a relationship and, you think these little things, but these are the things that you think about later. It's like, oh, what was that song that he liked? And they're not there. You can't ask them.
Yeah. And do you think you got enough of those questions in, or at least some?
I did, but I've learned that it's never going to be enough.
When I meet people who've lost a partner or a child or someone really, really significant, I know there's that thing that many people around them just don't know how to handle the grief and don't know what to say. And they will often, the last thing they're going to talk about is the death or the person who's died. How do you find that? What sort of experiences have you had in terms of other people and how they are with you now?
It's been lonely, I think. We are so, as a society, so averse to sitting in spaces that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So, and I'm all about that now.
Really? Wow.
Like if I feel something coming up and it's a negative emotion, it's just something that you have to sit through and your body just has to go through you.
That's an incredible thing to learn at such a young age.
Yeah, it's not something that you should suppress or, I suppose you do what's best for you at the time, but that's the space that I'm in, is that, I would rather sit in discomfort in the short term than deal with it, have it build up.
Prolong it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd say the grief, sitting in my grief has been lonely. You lose a lot of connections in very subtle ways.
And why is that?
Again, it's that concept of, we can't talk about that. We can't talk about that, but that is my husband.
Yes.
And that is what I had to live through.
Yeah.
So let's talk about it.
Yeah.
So I suppose in the beginning I felt a lot of resentment as well, because I felt like I wasn't, my grief wasn't being witnessed, I suppose. And that's why it felt so lonely. I know there are people who in the background were worried about me and thought about me every day, but I don't know that.
Yeah.
And if you don't tell me,
Yeah.
and if you don't reach out, I don't know that.
So what would you say to people who are in that situation and they're trying to comfort or be there for someone who has lost someone? What advice do you have for them?
I think just be very open. If you don't know what to say, then say that. You know,
Yeah.
if you'd like to say something that you might think, you know, or this might trigger them, then say that. Hey, you know, this you may not want to hear it, or you may not want to hear what I have to say about it, but I might. Is it okay if I share?
Yeah.
You know, it's all about that open communication and consent. Like if I were to support someone going through the same thing, it's just really be there, sit there in their grief, in that really difficult space, just be there with them, reach out regularly, even if you feel like perhaps you're bothering them. And again, it's about communication. Is it okay if I reach out every few days? You know, and they can say yes or no. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
Rather than, I better not do it because I don't know how she'll react.
I love that. It's just almost asking for permission to sort of have those uncomfortable conversations and say, you know, I feel a bit awkward about this. I don't know how to talk about it, but I'd really love to ask you about Hans. And is that okay? I think that's such an important message for people to have.
Exactly. I guess to come to the basics of it, it's almost like it's communication.
Yeah.
It's communication.
Yeah, good communication.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing is that, you know, I lost someone who he was every day. Like he was my everyday. He was there. He existed every minute of every day. Even if we weren't together, you know, I knew he was somewhere.
Yeah.
He was at home, at work, in hospital, or whatever. And I'd lost that. The moment that he died was a shift and he was gone. And I suppose people see it in their loss, is that, you know, wow, how absolutely sad and, you know, devastating that Hans is gone. But I feel like perhaps that's the extent of it for some people. Whereas for me, it was in the every little thing. You know, I'd lost him in every little thing that I do. And, you know, the impact of that on someone is profound.
So it's almost like Hans died, but also a version of you died as well. Is that right? Yeah, is that what you're saying? Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I have to talk about. So in today's culture, many people don't think that funerals are very important. There's that kind of, you know, don't have a funeral for me, don't spend the money. Of course, at Tomorrow Funerals, we're big believers that ceremony is an integral part of like moving through those early stages of grief. But what are your thoughts on that and the ceremony that you did have for Hans?
So Hans wasn't very fussed about what had happened, what happens after he had died.
Yep.
But I feel like a lot of it is for the people who are left behind.
The community.
Yeah, the community.
And for you and your family
yes,
as well?
Of course. I feel like it really helped everyone who had attended to kind of process the loss as well, in a way, as well as you know, have a space where we were able to remember him as a collective.
And of course, the memorial event that we put on was that we worked on, you know, together was not traditional. It wasn't a traditional funeral at a funeral parlour. How did you feel about that? Do you feel a sense of pride in what was created, or?
I think so. I suppose it wasn't a huge celebration of life that other people do, but I think it certainly was something that I couldn't handle anyway.
Yeah, well, I think the whole term celebration of life, you know, it's a very, a lot of people say that that's what they want now. We want to celebrate life, but that doesn't take into account the incredible grief that some people are going through, and especially when somebody's died, you know, they've died at a very young age in these circumstances. So tell me about that idea of celebrating life.
It was difficult. It was difficult to even think about, to be honest, because I think it was just a month after we'd lost him. And I don't know if you remember, but it was our first wedding anniversary.
I do remember,
actually.
yeah.
So I think for me it was a balance of acknowledging the loss that we were all experiencing, as well as acknowledging the life that he lived as well. So I really like the balance of that, I think.
Gill, tell me about Olivia's birth. What date was she born?
3rd of April.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, almost. Almost stumbled when I answered that. 3rd of April last year.
Yeah. And what has it been like welcoming Olivia into the world?
It was filled with grief.
Yeah, right.
Unfortunately.
Who was there with you at the birth?
My sister.
Yeah. And what was that like?
It was good to have her there.
Yeah.
Hans was there in his ash form.
Oh, really?
Still in the same box. We had asked, I ended up being induced.
Yep.
So we were in theatre, and I was so worried that his urn wouldn't be allowed inside. But they made sure that, you know, he was there and my sister was there. And the birth was, it wasn't as straightforward as I would have liked. So it was an emergency C-section, and, you know, all the staff were quite, they were aware of the situation, and they were all really lovely about that. And the moment that I saw Olivia, because, you know, there was a curtain and I kind of just lift her up. And when they lifted her up, I kind of looked at her and I said, while I was crying, I don't know why I was crying, happiness, sadness, I don't know. But I said, why does she look like Hans?
Oh.
And I'm not sure whether I said that in a form of relief or shock. But, you know, everyone in the theatre room, like, there was not a dry eye in there, I think. I wasn't very present because of all the medications that I'd received because I was induced. But my sister was saying, you know, everyone was kind of quite emotional during that time.
And what's she like? Tell us about Olivia.
She is a cheeky.
I've seen her photos on Instagram. She is absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, we're in the toddler stage. We're well into the toddler stage now, so it's been really hard. But she is so cheeky. Yeah, she's thriving.
How is it being a single mum?
It's still hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. The space that I'm in right now, you know, being almost 2 years post-loss, and people seeing that I'm doing well, I'm back at work, I'm managing a house on my own, I've got this thriving child and she's doing well. It's a lot of mental load. And I think being a mum who's partnered is already hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then doing it alone is even harder, mentally, emotionally, logistically. You know, all the decisions are up to me. If she gets sick, it's just me. You know, if there's a decision to be made about, you know, which childcare she should go to, it's just me. You know, there's just no one to bounce ideas off with. And I have a lot of worry about how this will affect her in the long run. So there are examples like, you know, after work, pick her up from childcare, come home, then I have to get dinner ready. Normally, I suppose in normal circumstances, there would be a second person there. keeping them entertained or giving them a bath while the other person did other things like cook dinner. But for me, it's just me. So sometimes, she'd be upset and grizzly and I just have to get dinner ready and, she's kind of just there and we're both just there in that space. And I worry a lot about how that would affect her emotionally growing up, probably minuscule, but, those are the things I worry about. And I also worry about how she would be not ever meeting Hans, I suppose, and not having that connection. Of course, we'd tell her about him and she'll have photos and all of that. But, I sometimes worry that it was a selfish decision to have her, knowing that she wouldn't have two loving parents present for her. That's, I suppose, in a nutshell, that's how it's been for me.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your honesty and, on that subject. It sounds, really hard. And tell me about your plans for your future and where you see that going.
I suppose prior to, I think it was the year, how long has it been? Almost year and a half mark that I started to think of the future. Prior to that, I was surviving day to day. And one thing that I always told Hans was, I'm not going to repartner. You were it for me. You're the love of my life. And how could I ever think about, looking for someone else? And he just looked at me and said, Gill, don't be silly. I want you to go on and find somebody who's better than me. Someone who can be there for you and love you. So I suppose I've been more open to that idea. Yeah, it's something that I've thought about a lot. And I can see myself repartnering in the future. I suppose that would be ideal.
Yeah. So it's almost like just the beginning of that awakening, that idea that would be something that's okay. That's the first step, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's a hard space to navigate because, it's almost like, okay, yes, my previous relationship was 9 years. And then obviously they'll ask, what happened? Well, I'm also a widow. And then there's the next step of, well, I actually have a child as well. So it has to be someone who's very, very understanding and open to, I guess, understanding in a way that, I have to make space for my grief and for my love for Hans. And
so he'll always be a part of your life.
Exactly. So I think I'm open to it, but I think it's going to be difficult. Yeah.
So if people want to follow you on Instagram, they can, and they can click to the show notes below, and we'll put all the information in there. So thank you so much, Gill. It's been incredible having you in here today. Your openness and, it's just been amazing. And I'm sure it will make a difference to other people. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Life and Death, Today and Tomorrow. I'm Kate Morgan from Tomorrow Funerals. If you'd like to hear more fascinating conversations about death, dying and celebrating life, make sure you follow. To watch some of the important moments from today's episode, visit our Instagram at tomorrow.stories. You'll find a link for that in the show notes.